So thank you so much for joining us. It's really lovely to have you with us talking about your new book. Um,
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me along. And thank you for helping with it.
I know it's lovely to have them on the site. And actually, it's been really nice. There's been loads more men downloading stuff, which has been good.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe if we start with you talking a little bit about the book for anyone who hasn't come across it yet, and
Yeah,
we can go from there.
yeah. Well, I have a copy here.
So do I.
I just have to dash down to the car to get out of the boot. Um, so this is a book. I mean, I've worked on Savile Row for 20 years,
Yeah.
and in that time, I have increased. Several things have happened over 20 years that I've been there. Firstly, I think my appreciation of just what an incredible place it is and what a unique place it is has only grown through my time there. Um, I think also I have come to feel very comfortable with the way that clothes are made on Savile Row. I feel like, despite its obvious elitist price tag,
Yeah.
um, the clothes that we make are still very good value, but also I think represent a good way of making clothes in the 21st century, knowing everything that we know about the harm that the fashion industry and the whole idea of fashion is doing to the planet
Yeah.
and also to the people that are involved in its making. So, Savile Row as a community is an extraordinary place, but what we do feels like a good way to do it.
Mm.
We only make the clothes people want.
Exactly.
And everybody, no matter how rich they are, who orders a suit on Savile Row does so with a great deal of care and consideration. Nobody's dropping £6,000 on a suit, no matter how rich they are, without really thinking about the place that piece of clothing that they are ordering will play in their life.
Yeah. So before we got rudely interrupted by the internet, you were just talking about the process of getting a suit made in
Yeah.
row.
Yeah, I know. I was talking about how I feel like Savile Row is the way that we operate is a good model.
Mm.
Taking the price tag out of it. So I think nobody ever ordered a Savile Row suit without due consideration. And as you said, they are personally involved in
Mm.
that process. It isn't just a click and something arrives. There is a long process of, I mean, firstly, the selection of the
Yeah.
fabrics and the linings and the
Yeah.
buttons and the style and everything that goes into it. And sometimes that is quite a quick process. Some customers really know what they want when they walk in. And if we already have a pattern for them, decisions can be made in minutes.
Yeah.
But then for some customers, it's a very long process that involves a lot of thinking and cogitating and reflecting, and sometimes bringing somebody else in to have a look at a fabric choice just to make sure.
Do you keep
So
all sorry to interrupt, do you keep all of the blocks for specific customers? Do you have
every customer has a set of patterns
Mm.
that is cut following their first garment obviously starts with a blank sheet of paper, and our cutter will measure them and then create an individual pattern for them. And the cutters on Savile Row use two methods. Either they will use a series of calculations to create their pattern directly from those measurements, or they will use a block and they will adjust that block to the measurements that they've taken. But either way, we then start a process that begins with a first basted fitting. so a very loosely assembled version of whatever garment it is that they are having made. And that baste will be fitted on the customer, and then typically it will be completely ripped down and smoothed flat, and then the marks from that fitting will be used to adjust both the fitting itself and the pattern at the same time. And you will typically go, and then it will be resewn or rebasted by the tailor, go back to the tailor to be rebasted. And depending on how good that fitting is, you will then move forward to a forward fitting where you will put things like facings and other bits and pieces on, so that the customer has a better idea of what the finished garment will look like. But you won't do things like put buttonholes or anything like that, which is permanent and so on in at this point. And then you will typically move to a final fitting, at which point you know, the jacket is largely finished and buttonholes and so on will be in. And then at that point we can still alter it. But up until this point, it has been in the hands of the cutter and the coat maker, trouser maker or waistcoat maker. But at that point that it is finished, it then moves, if it needs any further alteration, it then moves over to a specialist alteration tailor. It would be the same tailor that would look at the garment if it came back in years later for alteration. So but that process usually involves 3 or 4 visits to Savile Row, and typically will take, for a new customer with no pattern, will take 8 to 10 weeks typically, but it can be more if the shop is busy. But really it's in the hands of the customer, because if they aren't available to pop in for a fitting when the fitting is ready, then that's time to it.
Down the road,
but at the end of that process, that customer's pattern will be updated with the finalized garment, and will then be strung up and hung in the pattern room, and will be there to work from on any subsequent garment. And of course, quite a lot of people will have the same thing, but will have it in different fabrics. But of course, you know, you could start with a single-breasted jacket, and that would be the pattern that you would have hanging there. But if you then wanted to take if you wanted a double-breasted jacket, that pattern would be cut. 4 parts would be taken, and we would recut a DB front for that and change the lapels and so on to accordingly. And of course, also if you wanted overcoats from that, we would start from that SB pattern and cut you either double-breasted or single-breasted overcoats. Same with things like evening wear and other formal wear. You know, you start with that, but we would keep for each customer a set of patterns that would cover everything. So once we have the SB, the DB overcoat, the SB overcoat, you know, the peak lapelled dinner jacket, maybe a shawl collared dinner jacket or smoking jacket, different types of trousers. Also, you know, you might have a customer whose patterns occupy this much space on the rail, and depending on the cutter, but most cutters will keep a little snippet of the customer's fabrics. So each pattern becomes this really lovely record of that customer's history of their, you know, of their orders from the shop. And in some cases, you know, you'll have potentially dozens of little fabric swatches dating back over years and years, decades. I mean, I remember when I first started, we had a customer, and I started at Norton's in 2005. I remember we had a customer who he told me that he'd first come to Norton's as a customer in 1945. Wow. So he had been a customer for 60 years. He had so we had his whole life in clothing.
When you took over, how were you received? Because you must have been quite young coming into a kind of quite well-established world, and were they kind of pleased to have someone young and new taking it over?
Yeah, they were. I think most of us on the row who've spent any time there understand that success of Savile Row is entirely dependent actually upon the success of everyone within that community. So whilst we are competitive with one another, actually, because each house has a very different overall style and atmosphere, you know, if you are a Norton and Sons customer, you're unlikely to be the sort of guy that might shop at Dige or Pools or wherever. You know, we all look and feel different, and the clothing that you get from us is in many ways a sort of reflection of the overall style of the house. And so whilst we do, you know, we are cheek by jowl on that street, and we would like, you know, we're all looking to keep our businesses busy. We also recognize that in order for the whole ecosystem to survive, and that ecosystem relies on an ongoing flow of new talent into the industry. So whether that is cutters or tailors coming through the apprenticeship programs, everybody needs to be playing their part in that process, whether it's training or just encouraging people to consider a career on Savile Row. And the health of the whole thing, you know, if there were only one or two tailors left, you know, what does that present as an opportunity to somebody young who wants to build a career in our industry? You know, the fact is that by dint of there being a dozen, you know, brilliant tailors all in that one place, gives you the opportunity to come and learn your craft and then move around within the houses. And certainly both tailors and cutters tend to do that quite a lot these days, which I think is just a reflection on the way people work nowadays versus the way they maybe did 50 years ago.
You don't stay at your job for 50 years now.
So I think I was well received. I mean, I think, you know, it is, you know, just as I would, if another house on the street was going through a tough period, I would welcome the arrival of somebody who evidently was going to bring it back to life and allow it to be a strong and vibrant member of the community. And broadly, that was how I was received on the street. I think I was the youngest governor on Savile Row. Certainly at the time I was. There may have been younger ones since, but I don't know. But no, it was great. And you know, it's funny how just how sort of knitted together the whole community is. We all train apprentices, whether on the making side or on the cutting side. And when they eventually decide to move somewhere else, which often they do, we retain very close links with them. And there is a bit in the book where I describe this world and how, you know, how sort of unified the whole thing is, because particularly, you know, nowadays the apprentices coming up all socialize with one another. You know, if you are in your early 20s on a street, you know, on the street, you will naturally end up going to the pub after work with the other apprentices, whether they are cutters or tailors. And no matter where on the street you might end up, you retain those bonds with those people throughout your career. And so, you know, in my workshop on any given day, there will be tailors and cutters from half a dozen different houses on the street, just passing through to say hello, or, you know, organize a beer, or, you know, take an order for burgers at lunchtime, or, you know, or borrow a bit of fabric, or borrow a bunch, or do whatever. And it's a really, really interesting, it's a funny community because it is incredibly cooperative in so many ways, and everybody knows everybody's business. Because, you know, gossip and news travels like wildfire throughout the workshops, carried on the wind of tailors, cutters, and the cloth merchants, who are probably the worst or best, depending on your point of view, for spreading news and gossip throughout the street. but it's an extraordinary place, because I can't think of anywhere. No, I mean, I suspect maybe kind of the tweed weavers of Harris, but they're much more Harris Lewis. They're much more broadly dispersed. But I mean, I guess they come together at the mills when they turn up to do their finishing, and they trade stories and bits of gossip and what have you in that way. But you know, to have 12 or so old houses doing the same thing, literally next door to one another in one place, is quite unique.
I worked slightly in that world. I used to be a couture hat maker. So I did that for about 5 years, but I also, as my other job, I used to prepare all the hats for Lock & Co. So I was always down Jerram Street going and collecting them.
Yeah.
And so I totally get that world where you all know each other and everyone's you're all competition, but you all work together, and, we go into each other's places to borrow things. And yeah, it's a nice community.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really loved the book. I think the thing I found, because I know that it's kind of supposed to be like a source book, but I loved the stories within it, and it made it feel like really human. And yeah, it was a really interesting read, especially the bits at the beginning and how you got Norton's and how, all the history behind it.
Yeah. Well, it is, as I say, it's 20, it is in lots of ways a sort of love letter to this amazing place. And it's a place that I have really had so many wonderful experiences on that street, both in the workshops and in the kind of broader community, and have been lucky to meet and work with so many amazing people over the years. And just the extraordinary people that have walked through that front door. from some of the most high profile men on the planet, from royalty to rock stars to designers and other people in the world of art and creativity. And I mean, we've got Turner Prize winners and Grammy and BAFTA winners, and I mean, people who've just done amazing things with their lives. And we sit on the sofa and have a chat about clothes, and in the most kind of informal and relaxed, and kind of we're having conversations with people who 20 years ago I would have considered sort of heroes and icons, and yet they're here to find out what we have to say about clothes and how we might help them elevate their wardrobes and tell stories about themselves through what they wear and all this sort of stuff. And it has been amazing. But I mean, the second part of the book, of course, was an attempt to put down on paper the processes that the tailors on Savile Row and the shirt makers on Jermyn Street follow, so that we do have a clear, and firstly, so that anybody who wants to have a go at doing it can have a go at doing it, but also to record it for posterity, because I think it is. I read this amazing book called Made in England by Dorothy Hartley, who was a writer in the 40s, 50s. I might have that wrong. But she went round and recorded a lot of sort of heritage country crafts in a way, because she felt that it was important that they were captured for posterity in case at any point in the future they were lost. And of course, most of them have been lost. And so her record, I don't feel like Savile Row is going anywhere anytime soon.
No,
but I've often been asked by people, particularly since being on Sewing Bee, I've been asked by people who sew whether there is a book, a tailoring book that I could recommend, and genuinely, there wasn't one. The tailor and cutter manuals that I mention in the book are sort of the closest you might come
So something,
two
yeah,
sets of manuals for Savile Row tailoring, but also all sorts of weird stuff like how to run your shop and how to manage customers and how to deal with all those. I mean, there's quite a lot about cutting for different figures and so on in there, but the instructions in the tailor and cutter manuals are brief.
yeah,
I think they do in a dozen pages what in this book we're doing in 3 dozen pages, and it's almost like you need to be a Savile Row tailor to follow the instructions in those books. Also, they're not really available. I think
yeah.
the copies in good condition are rare as hen's teeth. But there have been, to my knowledge, and to the knowledge of my colleagues on the street, there isn't another complete instructional on how to do this. And so I feel like it was, we actually originally intended to try and do it for Norton's 200th anniversary.
Okay.
2021, but for very obvious reasons,
Yeah.
that fell by the wayside. We weren't even sure if Norton's would be around.
No.
Post-COVID, given how difficult it was for the tailors of Savile Row to get through that. Our businesses were entirely dependent on face-to--face interactions with people, and that couldn't happen.
So difficult trying to navigate.
Yeah. But it was also a difficult book to create because the process of documenting it proved to be very difficult. I actually had a technical writer lined up to work with me on the technical sections of the book, and they spent one day with Chris, our trouser maker, and then got in touch with me that evening and said,
no,
I don't think I can do this. I can't, there is so much nuance in what he is doing and he can't explain it to me because he's just doing it.
Yeah.
And I can't understand it because I've never done it. And I just don't think I can make this work, which of course at that point I said, well, fair enough. But, the clock was ticking and we were, I'd signed a contract with Gestalten to make the book. And so I spoke to one of my tailors and asked them if they could help. And they suggested that, firstly, they said that they didn't think they could because they didn't think they had the skill that, they didn't have the writing skills, the technical writing skills to convey what they were doing. They could do it, they're doing it in a way that they don't ever even have to think about it because it is learned, it is so deeply learned that they do it automatically. They pick up and manipulate and do in a way that is completely automatic. If you've been doing something 40 hours a week for 15 years, it is so automatic to you that you don't even begin, you can't even begin to compute what level of detail you need to tell people who don't know it.
Yeah.
So actually,
fabrics and stuff. Yeah, it's impossible.
So they suggested Ricky. And Ricky I'd worked with for years, known for years and years, because he was one of those cutters who was in and out of our workshop on a regular basis, and a lovely, lovely guy. But of course, cutters on Savile Row have to learn to make before they go on to learn to cut, because part of the apprenticeship process on Savile Row is that if you're taking the cutting route, you have to learn waistcoat, trouser, and coat making to a level before you move on to learning to cut. So you don't learn to the level that you would learn to if you were training to be a tailor, but you have to understand the process in order to be able to cut the patterns for those jobs. So so luckily for me, Ricky agreed to do those sections for me, and he did it brilliantly, but it's a complicated, you know, trying to describe something that is so nuanced is a difficult job. I mean, I did the shirt section, which by comparison was incredibly straightforward, and thankfully Lizzie at Emma Willis was brilliant, and her method is very clear, and it was very near to the method that I learned when I started on Savile Row. So when I started on Savile Row, I learned to do all of the tailoring and shirt making that we did, but I only did it to the, you know, the minimum level I needed to be able to run a Savile Row tailors, you know, and with the shirts and shirt making, Gary, who was our shirt maker at the time, way back, he had I learned to make with two of his team in the same way that I followed sort of Lizzie and co at Emma Willis, and actually shirt making by comparison is relatively straightforward. So if you're looking at the book and you want to have a go at one project,
that's the one.
Shirt making is by far the simplest, and then I think you go waistcoat, trousers, coat, in order of increasing difficulty and time. But you know, I think most people who are competent sewers, competent with a sewing machine, because there's no hand sewing in the shirt making process.
No.
I think anybody who has a reasonable level in sewing can follow our method for making shirts and can make beautiful shirts. It's just, you know, you've got to have a little bit of dexterity in the fingers to manage that fabric. But I think the method is quite straightforward. You know, you put the two bits together, you fold them, you put the needle down, you sew, you move. It's quite straightforward compared to the complexity of manipulating, you know, just, you know, when we talk about shrinking in or stretching, you know, just how much shape are you putting into the calf of a trouser? You know, just what does that feel like? What does that pressure under the hand feel like? And the weight, it takes time to do, but it is hopefully incredibly enjoyable, because I think the wonderful thing about the way we sew on Savile Row is it is much more like I think many other crafts. You are using your hands to manipulate the fabric and create shape in the garment that isn't just about putting two bits together and sewing them together. There is a whole world of manipulation of that fabric that I think for a lot of people who sew, certainly if you're doing dressmaking, there isn't this that kind of structure going on. And I think I would hope for a lot of people, they might really enjoy that process, because it does bring you to a very different place in the world of making that I think a lot of people probably, you know, many people probably don't even know exists. You know, I think a lot of people imagine that tailoring, like dressmaking, is you know, you get the bits and you put them together and it happens, but it's not.
It's a piece, isn't it?
And it is magical. And you know, when I watch my tailors at work, which I do all the time if I'm in the workroom, it is always it's wonderful, because this, you know, this garment emerges in 3 dimensions out of those flat pieces of cloth and those pieces of canvas that they put into them, and it is, you know, it's sort of alchemic in a way. You know, it's this wonderful thing sort of arises, and you know, and they are very much sculpted, and they're human form. You know, the coats that we make and the trousers that we make. And I think a lot of people are often surprised by the idea that a pair of Savile Row trousers don't just hang straight. They are, you know, they are shaped, not to the same extent that coats are, but they are shaped garments, and the good trouser makers will work all of that shape into those clothes, because human legs are not, they're not like pencils. they are they
No.
are shaped in all sorts of different ways, and they come in and they go out, and we are trying to create clothes that look as if they're hanging perfectly, and straight over bodies which
Like the
are
wonky hangers. Yeah.
all sorts of wonky old shapes.
Yeah.
And that is the art of the tailor and the cutter combined, is to make something that looks like it's hanging perfectly naturally over bodies which in some cases are very,
Yeah.
lumpy and bumpy.
Lumpy and bumpy. Like all of us underneath.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I've always, as a person, I've always loved that the sort of interaction between human beings and materials in the process of making things, particularly handmade things, working with a material that is natural and pliable and can be formed in a way, and which develops a patina, and which, the more you work it, the more beautiful it becomes, I think is something that I've just always really, really enjoyed. And, and when I came to Savile Row, all of those, as a kid, I really loved fashion. I really loved tailored clothes. I really loved brands with stories.
yeah.
And I really loved handmade things, and all of that,
Combined into.
right at the center of all of that is the world of Savile Row. So it was a great a great piece of good fortune on my part that I came to end up where I ended up, because it wasn't by any great plan.
Yeah. How did the sewing bee gig happen? How did that?
Well, I honestly, I'm not 100% certain, but what I think happened was that in the second, I think it was early in the second year that I was working on Savile Row. BBC Four had commissioned a documentary series about the Row, and made by a guy called Ian Denyer, who I'm still very good friends with. And Ian and I just got on well. And one of the things that I had decided to do when I took over at Norton's, there were a couple of things that I decided to do. Firstly, I sort of returned the business to just doing what it had always done, which was create the best possible handmade bespoke clothes men that we could create. And when I took it over, they were doing other things. They were involved in other things that were just trying to prop the business up, because at the time it wasn't making enough money. In fact, it was losing a lot of money. And they'd sort of, I think they'd just lost sight of how to get it back on track, and were doing things like, I mean, they were just sort of doing odd things that was, like selling sporting tours and safaris, and
Really?
selling guns, and all you couldn't get into the shop because they had a gun cabinet, and they'd sort of moved themselves into this sort of shooting, fishing. But also I celebrated the fact that it was small, and they'd always been very reluctant to discuss how big or otherwise the business was. But I thought it was a positive thing that we were only making a couple of hundred suits a year. And in a world where a lot of luxury had become very ubiquitous, and, luxury brands were available at every major airport in the world, and, on every big shopping street across the planet, that sort of luxury was of less interest to me. And to me, really, luxury is a little bit about scarcity. And I wanted to celebrate the fact that Norton's was just little, and we were just doing the one thing that we'd always been doing, and we're doing it well. But I also decided to make a great play of sourcing interesting British cloths from as many small and interesting mills with great stories that I could possibly get my hands on, because I think our customers are very much part of what you buy on Savile Row is not just the clothing, it is the connection to the creation of that clothing. And also, if we're doing our job right, the creation of the cloth from which that clothing is made. Our customers love to come into the shop and look through into the workshop in the back and, see the tailors working away, the cutter at the board and the tailors sewing. And, a lot of them will poke their head around the workshop door just out of interest, because, again, an important part of the value of your suit is that very direct connection to the people who've made it for you. You don't just know that their names, you know who they are. You've chatted to them on, several occasions. And if you've been a customer for a long time, in some cases, hundreds of occasions, and you like these people and you appreciate their skill, you value their skill, you value the knowledge that they have acquired over years and years of doing this thing. And that is really important. And I think, and going one step further than that, I had always really liked the textile mills of Britain that I'd been involved with, through either just going on holiday or through my granddad's job in the textile industry in the Borders. And, I was always personally very compelled by some of the stories of some of those weavers. And so I wanted to bring that into Norton's, because, again, part of the joy of having clothes made in that way is understanding the provenance of everything that goes into it. And so, we would have conversations, I would have conversations in the shop with customers about the tweeds that we were looking at. And, I could tell them where they were woven and who wove them and, how they were woven. And in some cases, I could even tell them exactly, what the sheep were, from which the wool that went into them had come, because I'd met the sheep. There's a small mill on the Isle of Mull called Ardalanish, and I'd been to the mill, and the sheep are roaming around on the hillsides next to the mill, and I've been out and fed them a turnip, and we're and it was so, and it's the most beautiful spot as well. Down in the southwest corner of Mull, over the top, this place called Bonesson, and you've got this incredible view over to the Paps of Jura, and that storytelling aspect was really, really important to me. And so I took Ian Denyer with me up to the Isle of Harris, and we made this really beautiful bit of film up there, and people really responded to it very strongly. And on the back of it, when we got to Harris to make the Savile Row film, a guy called William Haggis had just bought the biggest mill on the island, and his plan was to sort of industrialize Harris tweed and to only make 4 patterns and to only sell them to his own tailoring company, sort of corner the market on Harris tweed. And people were up in arms. Actually, he was doing it for good, for well-meaning reasons. He felt that was the best way to make sure the business up there had a future. But others had different views, and so there was this grand kerfuffle going on, and we happened to be there when all of this was unfolding. And as a result, when the documentary aired on the BBC, lots of people got in touch to ask if I knew what was happening with Harris tweed. And so I went back to the BBC and said, look, I think we should follow up this story and do a series about Harris tweed. And happily they said yes. And the lady that commissioned the Savile Row documentary and the Harris tweed documentary was a lady called Emma Willis. And she was the commissioner. She then moved to BBC Two and she commissioned Sewing Bee.
So it was a nice.
Yeah. So I think I'm fairly sure that she put my name, through my name in the hat. Yeah. But I ended up screen testing with a bunch of different people, just like everybody else did, and happily for me, got the job.
Yeah. 10 years later.
And 10 years later, 11 years later, here we are, going stronger than ever with this amazing show that has encouraged so many people to rediscover how good it feels to make
stuff. Yeah.
well, to make anything. I mean, it's, you know, it's one of a number, and, you know, our sister show, you know, down in Stoke is doing just the same for people potting, and, you know, this great resurgence in people enjoying making things,
Yeah.
is giving people a great deal of pleasure, and giving people a great deal of solace, and, you know, helping improve their physical and their mental health, and doing all sorts of amazing things, and also doing a whole ton of good for the planet at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's been a pleasure, and it continues to be a pleasure. We're currently working on series 11 at the moment.
Yeah, I was about to say, you must be, because it's usually in the summer, isn't it? So you must be going into the next batch of it.
Yeah, we've finished the challenges for, well, we've finished our version of the challenges. The BBC needs to sign off on them.
Okay.
And then we need to make them work as challenges. But we've signed off on the ideas behind all of the challenges for series 11. And entries are now closed, and so the process of whittling down all those thousands of people who've applied down to the lucky 12 is ongoing. And Esme and I don't get involved in that bit for obvious reasons, but, you know, we are. I think every year I think, oh gosh, those challenges are great. We're never going to be able to do another 36 challenges that good.
God, it is a lot to think of.
Lo and behold, you know, we've just come up with another 36 challenges, which I think are every bit as good as the ones we set for this year's show, which is obviously on now, depending on when you're watching this. But it's fun. It's really fun. And
I think the time they've got to make stuff has got shorter. I swear. Each week it feels harder, like 3 hours to make things now, like quite complicated stuff.
Well, we have to keep. I mean, so people do often question the timings on these challenges, and anybody who has watched series 10, you know, the first challenge of series 10, nobody finished.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much unheard of. But the way we create the challenges is that we come up with the idea, and then the sewing production team go away and cut a pattern, and we'll make a sample, and then we will review that as a team, and we'll and while they are making that sample, they will time it and come back to us and say, right, we think this is probably X amount of time, and we'll say, well, that's too long, because the show has to work in the time frame that we're at. Like, you know, it would be lovely for every challenge to have, you know, a week, but then we can't film an episode over 3 weeks. You know, we have 2 days, and we have to fit 3 challenges into 2 days. And also we have to not make it so incredibly exhausting for the contestants that they are, you know, dying on their feet.
Rocking in the corner.
Yeah. So what we then do is we come up, and then we think, right, okay, well, that's too long. We're going to have to take some of the elements out of this garment. So we might take out the lining, or remove a couple of pockets, or we'll go to a plain cuff instead of a button cuff, or do whatever. You know, we will take bits out of it to try and make it a little friendlier and quicker to do. But once we've settled on it, and once we've got a set of instructions and a final pattern, we give it to a panel of former contestants, sewing bee contestants.
Oh, really? Wow.
And they test it.
Oh, that's amazing.
So they do a time test.
Yeah.
And we don't just give it to the winners of every year. We give it to a selection of people who have gone out, some in early rounds, some in middle rounds, and some in later rounds, so that, you know, we feel confident
they can do
these challenges are all doable by anybody that's on the show, as long as they crack on, they don't make too many mistakes, and they don't spend too much time talking.
I was about to say.
The great unknown, the thing that we cannot control is how much time they spend chatting to one another, because this is particularly, obviously, first episode, first challenge. it's all very new. Cameras are there, everything is live, they're all in the room together. You know, it is possible to do, you know, it's definitely possible to make that A-line denim skirt in the time we gave them, because we've checked it on lots of people of different abilities. But it's just how long does it take you to choose your fabric? You know, like what you don't see in the edit is some people are there scratching their heads for a quarter of an hour, you know, trying to choose a fabric, and there isn't time for that. You know, you've got to make a quick decision. You've got to know your fabrics well enough that you've got to have I mean, really, the thing that they never do that always astonishes me is I don't think they ever open the envelope, have a quick read through and think, right, I know what I've got to do here. I'm going to pick the right fabric. They run to that haberdashery and their eyes light up and it's tick, 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 tick. And sometimes, you know, they're choosing fabrics without having thought about the processes that they're going to have to follow with that fabric. So sometimes that causes all, but I mean, that's part of the fun of it. It would be, it would be boring telly if they all chose brilliant fabrics and executed it brilliantly every week.
I know, and that's why we all love watching, because we're all screaming at the screens, being like, "Don't pick that!
Don't pick that! No,
the worst thing you could pick."
Well, we all know, you know. I think we're sort of screaming at them in our heads, but you know, the producers are all sort of rubbing their hands together with glee, and Esme and I are like, "Oh no, this is going to go badly wrong here." You know, when we walk around, because you know, we walk around quite quickly in that first challenge to see what they've chosen fabric wise, and quite often we walk away, and of course we have to not give anything away. Really try and not give anything away at that point. You know, when inside we're doing exactly that. We're, you know, in our heads, we've got our heads in our hands thinking this is going to be a nightmare. But you know, we're not allowed to. That's, you know, we're there to judge, not to help.
No, it's quite a tough. I would be really bad at that, trying to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally you can't sort of help but like raise an eyebrow, or
which is enough for them to know.
Sometimes it's enough. You know, also, I mean, with things like pattern challenges, you've got to follow the blinking pattern. You know, and if somebody's saying to you, "Well, I think I'm just going to go and do this instead," you're like,
"Yeah, really?
Are you?
Just do what you're told. This is the do as you're told bit."
Yeah, this is the do as you're told challenge. But yeah, it's. I think it has got more difficult, but it has got more difficult because the general standard amongst the contestants now is really, really high.
It is.
And we have to find a way to make sure that we separate them. You know, and if we gave everybody more than enough time, everybody would take their time and finish it beautifully, and we'd have 12 perfect garments, and that wouldn't work. This is a competition, and we have to be able to separate them every week. We have to be able to, sadly, decide who goes.
You know what we do every week? We hunt out the patterns for the made to measure.
Do you? How does that work? I always assumed you had a mole on the inside.
I wish we had a mole. I dream of a mole, but no, it is Rachel and me. We're just like nerds now, because we've obviously got
where you've got this encyclopedic knowledge of all the patterns on the planet.
Doing it for so many years now that so we sit there with our laptops and find them and hunt them out. That's what we do every week. And it started off. Yeah, it was. And now we're like, we can't stop now. It's gone too far. We have to do it every year now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hats off to you, because some effort to find something that
we can now confirm it's not you giving us any intel. It's not you.
It's not. It's definitely not me. I always assumed it had to be Esme, but
no. Sadly, she never answers her phone when I call her. But you know.
She's pretty bad at that,
Well, I feel like I have kind of held you hostage for long enough. I should let you get on with your day.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. I'm going to hold the book up again just to remind people.
Yeah, do.
And to remind them, of course, that, you know, we have got the basic blocks for
Yeah, on our site.
for the makes in the book, the 4 makes in this massive book. You know, that's it. I mean, I think the coat making section, how many pages is the coat making section?
It's a lot. I really also
Machining,
was so
pressing.
there's so many girls in it. That's what I really liked as well. You had lots of women.
Right?
I
Yeah,
was
well, it is. I mean, it's a fun. Yeah. So the coat making section is 40 pages.
that's
It's detailed. Yeah, well, I mean, this is the interesting thing I think about the world of Savile Row. Even when I started, which is not that long ago, it was definitely a more male-centric place. But actually, in the 20 years since I've been there, I think the number of women apprenticing, particularly on the making side, has outnumbered the number of men apprenticing. And so the gender balance inside the workrooms of Savile Row has swung very dramatically, actually. And I think it's a very good thing. It creates a very different atmosphere. And I think, yeah, I think it's been a very positive change.
How long is an apprenticeship?
It really depends on you.
Okay.
On waistcoat making, it might be as little as 1.5 years.
Okay.
If you're really quick and good and you already know how to use the sewing machine and hold a needle and all of that. Coat making, normally you're looking at 3 to 4 years. I think more than likely you're looking at 4 years. And if you want to be a cutter, you're looking at 4 to 5, but normally more like 5 years. And the interesting thing about the way that Savile Row works, and I love it for this, is that if you serve your apprenticeship with us at Norton's, it's not up to us to decide whether you're good enough to work. It's up to a panel of our peers at different houses. So we would say we think you're ready, but then your work has to be examined by at least a couple of other, you know, the head senior tailors or senior cutters from at least a couple of other houses. So it ensures that there is a minimum standard that everybody is happy with amongst all apprentices on the street.
Oh, it's my dream. I would love to come and do that. I'd love it.
You got spare 4 years up your sleeve?
Yeah, I'm not busy.
Crack on.
Okay, well, I'll send my CV in to you, shall I? And I'll see you next
Yeah, well, it's also a funny one because there isn't really a sort of formal intake. I think that's one of the things we slightly could do with is having a sort of formal process for you know, bringing, you know, when do people start? But it's really ad hoc. We have a couple of graduation ceremonies a year, but what we don't have is a standard intake time. And really, you know, how you get on and into an apprenticeship on Savile Row really is a bit of a lottery. I think, you know, we used to have very close links with the college in East London, and there was a pre-apprenticeship training course that was really handy.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking for people with a good level of making, you know, ideally before they start with us, because you know, we can't. It's a long enough process to learn. I mean, and then, you know, we might need you to unlearn certain things before you learn them again. But you know, we need people. You've got to have. I mean, it's an interesting skill set, and actually, I talk about that skill set a little bit in the book. You know, what you need to be a tailor or need as a skill set to be a cutter is quite an unusual set of skills.
Yeah.
But there's a minimum. You've got to be great with your hands. You've got to have a good eye, whether you're cutting or making. Because as people will find out when they download the pattern doesn't include, you know, when I was working in the workshop, I would cut out the job. So John Kent, who was my first head cutter when I started, I'd strike John's jobs for him. But you know, striking a pair of trousers, it's just 2 bits. Like, there's no pocket facings, there's no waistbands, we just cut and then the tailor, they add all of that as they go along, and I think people are often surprised that is the case.
So, but yeah, you don't have your pocket. Yeah, exactly. All of the facings, everything that you need. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. You cut your own jets. You do, all of that stuff is done by the tailor,
Yeah.
and that is why individual makers makes. I mean, even to the extent that within one house, we might have 2 or 3 different trouser makers at Norton at any one time, and they might all do their side straps a bit differently for their strap and buckle. So you'll know if it's a Couture or whoever else it is, just by the shape and the way that those side straps are sewn on. But every pair of trousers comes out different.
Yeah.
I've had most of my trousers have been made by Chris, whose method we follow in the book. But occasionally I've had trousers, either because he's away or
Yeah.
he's busy or whatever. I've had trousers made from my pattern by other trouser makers. Not many. And it is amazing, you take the same pattern, you
Yeah.
cut
And
out
so
the
they
same
feel
bit in exactly the same way, and you give them to 2 trouser makers, and those trousers will feel very different. And so it's because of, and because of that, we make sure that if you come to us as a customer and your first pair of trousers go to Chris, every subsequent trouser will go to Chris, because if you try on trousers made by somebody else, you'll be like, these aren't my trousers. They can feel that different. So yeah,
it was like that with hats, actually.
Sorry?
When I did hats and they'd get things out of the archive that they'd want to redo. You had to make it in exactly the way that the person who had originally made it in that order.
Yeah, because otherwise it would turn out different. Yeah. 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 No, it's amazing. It is amazing. And I think what we've done with the book, obviously, is we have followed the particular method of 3 tailors.
Yeah.
Chris, Felicity, and Rachel. That is their method. That is the method that they were taught by their master, who learned that method from their master, and so on and so on, back 700 years to the start of tailoring in London. And you could trace it, and sadly, I don't think we could anymore trace all of that lineage, but we can trace some of it. But of course, it is, and I wanted to do it that way because I wanted to do one complete method. So that is Chris's method. And Chris has worked for me for the entire time I've been there, but he's also, made for Huntsman and still makes for Huntsman and a number of others. And it's a great, he makes beautiful trousers. There are different methods, and everyone else will have a slightly different variation on that. But it would be impossible to have a general method. It has to be a specific method, and that's what we've done from start to finish. That is those makers' method that we have documented. And it's the same with shirt making. That method that Lizzie follows has been the method that she has learned, and other shirt makers will have different ways, and they will only be subtly different, but the results will be subtly different and that's one of the wonderful things about the place. It's so unique, right down to the person who's sewn it.
So would sorry, I've said that we should end, and now I'm keeping someone like Lizzie, for example, does she just work for you, or does she work?
Well, no, Lizzie works for Emma Willis. Yeah, so she just makes shirts. So in shirt making, it is a bit different because the shirt maker, well, it's not, because some shirt makers have their own teams, their own workshop, and some shirt makers are cutters who will do the fitting and the cutting with their customer, but they will give their making to a small workshop that might be working for multiple different people. So there's different ways of doing it. But on the making side in Savile Row, again, something people find surprising is that a trouser maker who might be working for us might also be working for 1 or 2 other Savile Row houses. So, and coat maker who is in our workshop might also be sewing for somebody 3 doors down, because the sewing tailors are self-employed. The cutters are employed by the houses. So the way that the suit is cut and fitted is specific, but the way that it is sewn, you could be paying a very different price for a pair of trousers 3 doors down from the one you get from us, and they might be sewn by the same person in the same cloth.
Wow, that's so great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it moves about.
Yeah. It is. It also means that it balances the production capacity across Savile Row because,
Mm.
Norton's might be busy and somebody two doors down might be quiet and vice versa. But it means that we don't have to be laying people off or hiring people on or going through, it balances the sewing capability, the tailoring capability throughout the entire community, which means that it keeps the whole thing on an even keel in a very unique and I think completely unique way.
Yeah. So it's kind of like community clothing, the Savile Row edition, where everyone's
Kind of. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, right. I'm definitely going to let you go now.
Definitely going to let me go now. Well,
Thank you
again, been
so
a
much.
pleasure. Thank you. And hopefully you'll see a few more downloads as a few more people go and get brave enough to have a go at actually making this stuff.
Yeah, we've had quite a few people who have embarked on it, so we've had emails about them. So I'm sure there'll be lots more.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Lovely. Well, an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.